Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is yelling at the one person who has the power to change your life forever. The crystal chandeliers above the Grand Astoria ballroom bathe everything in warm golden light, while soft conversations drift through the elegant room like gentle music. Silverware clinks against fine china, and every polished marble column reflects a world Maren Ellis has never truly belonged to. She smooths the wrinkles from her simple black catering uniform and catches her reflection in one of the towering windows. Her shoes are comfortable instead of fashionable. Her hair is tied back in a hurried ponytail, and the tiny burn mark on her wrist from this morning's coffee spill still stings beneath the cuff of her sleeve. She forces herself to breathe. 8 hours. Just survive 8 hours, collect the paycheck, and maybe she can finally cover another piece of her aunt's medical bill. Around her, women sparkle in designer gowns while men in custom tuxedos casually discuss investments worth more than she could earn in several lifetimes. None of that matters to Maren. She keeps her eyes on the silver tray balanced carefully in her hands as she moves between guests with practiced efficiency. She has learned that invisible people hear everything. A nervous laugh escapes from a young employee, carrying wine glasses beside her. First gala? Maren whispers with an encouraging smile. The girl nods. Just remember, they're people before they're rich. The younger server smiles back, visibly calmer. Maren continues through the ballroom, weaving around conversations about luxury resorts, private jets, and upcoming charity auctions. Near the center stage, she notices an older female staff member adjusting decorations beneath an enormous lighting fixture suspended from the ceiling. The woman reaches upward, stretching farther than she should. At that exact moment, a tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit turns toward one of the event managers. His posture is calm, confident, almost impossibly composed. His dark hair is neatly styled, and even from across the room, he carries the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Maren hears him say in a firm voice, "Move her out. Now." Her stomach tightens instantly. The event manager hesitates, looking confused. The older employee continues working without realizing anyone is talking about her. Maren's pulse quickens. She has heard that tone before. She remembers landlords dismissing struggling tenants, wealthy customers speaking to exhausted cashiers as though they were invisible, executives walking past janitors without making eye contact. Something inside her refuses to stay silent. Before she can reconsider, she sets her tray onto the nearest table and walks straight toward the sharply dressed stranger. Every step feels heavier than the last, yet she never slows down. Several nearby guests pause their conversations, sensing the unusual interruption. The man turns just as Maren stops a few feet away from him. His blue eyes meet hers with quiet surprise. "Excuse me," she says, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Maybe where you come from people are disposable, but that woman has been working since before this party even started." A hush settles over the surrounding crowd. The event manager freezes. Someone lowers a champagne glass halfway to their lips. Maren doesn't notice any of it anymore. She only sees the stranger standing in front of her. "If you have something to say," she continues, "maybe try speaking to her with respect instead of ordering people around like furniture." For a brief second, the man simply studies her expression. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't raise his voice. If anything, he almost looks concerned. Maren mistakes his silence for arrogance. "Money doesn't give anyone the right to treat hardworking people like they don't matter," she says firmly. "Someone should have told you that a long time ago." The silence lasts only a heartbeat before the sharply dressed stranger turns toward the event manager again, his voice suddenly calm but unmistakably urgent. "Please move her away from the stage now. The lighting support is unstable." His words barely leave his mouth when two maintenance workers rush forward, carefully guiding the older employee away from the platform. Almost immediately, one of the technicians points toward a loosened metal bracket above the decorative lights. A quiet murmur spreads across the ballroom as the crew temporarily closes off the area. Maren's confidence disappears as quickly as it arrived. She watches the workers examine the overhead fixture, realizing the stranger had not been dismissing the woman at all. He had been trying to protect her from a possible accident. Heat rushes into her face. Every pair of nearby eyes seems fixed on her. She opens her mouth to apologize, but the words refuse to come. The man simply looks at her with the same composed expression. She deserved to be moved somewhere safe, he says gently. That was all I meant. Marin lowers her eyes for the first time that evening. I misunderstood. The event manager exhales with visible relief while several guests quietly return to their conversations. No one laughs at her, somehow making the embarrassment feel even heavier. Before she can say another word, her supervisor appears beside her with a forced smile that does not reach his eyes. Marin, kitchen. Now. She nods silently, unable to argue. As she walks away, she cannot stop replaying the last 60 seconds in her mind. She had judged a complete stranger before giving him the chance to explain. The service hallway feels much colder than the glamorous ballroom. Stainless steel counters replace polished marble. The scent of roasted salmon gives way to industrial dish soap and fresh coffee. Her supervisor folds his arms. Do you have any idea who that guest might be? Marin shakes her head. No, sir. Neither do I, he replies honestly. But whoever he is, people like that do not enjoy being confronted in front of 500 donors. Marin swallows hard. I thought he was humiliating her. Her supervisor studies her for a long moment before sighing. I know you meant well. That has always been your problem. She almost smiles despite herself. He was right. Ever since she was a little girl, she had spoken before, calculating the consequences. It had cost her promotions, friendships, and more than one steady job. Yet every time she promised herself to stay quiet, she failed the moment someone weaker needed a voice. Finish your shift, he says at last. Then please try not to start any more revolutions before dessert is served. Marin quietly returns to work. An hour later, the ballroom has settled back into its elegant rhythm. Guests bid on artwork while a string quartet fills the room with soft music. She keeps her eyes lowered, determined to become invisible for the rest of the evening. During a short break, she slips into a quieter corridor beside the ballroom to cool the embarrassment burning across her face. She runs cold water over her hands in a nearby service station, only then noticing the small burn on her wrist has turned bright red from carrying hot coffee earlier that morning. That looks painful. The gentle voice startles her. She turns to find an elegant woman in her early 60s standing nearby. Her silver hair is styled with effortless grace, and she wears a navy evening gown that somehow feels sophisticated without trying too hard. There is kindness in her eyes instead of judgment. Marin quickly hides her wrist. It is nothing. The woman reaches into a small handbag and removes a beautifully folded white linen handkerchief embroidered with delicate blue flowers. Please, she says with a warm smile. Wrap this around it until you can find some ointment. Marin hesitates. I cannot accept something that nice. You would be helping me, the woman replies softly. I would rather see it used than carried around in my purse. Marin carefully accepts the handkerchief. The fabric feels impossibly soft against her skin. Thank you, she whispers. The woman studies her for another quiet moment before asking a question that catches her completely off guard. Tell me something honestly. Do you always stand up for strangers the way you did tonight, even when it may cost you everything? Marin lowers her eyes to the neatly folded handkerchief wrapped around her wrist before answering. I wish I could tell you I think things through first, but I usually do not. My aunt says my mouth has always been faster than my common sense. The elegant woman laughs softly, the kind of warm laugh that makes people feel comfortable instead of embarrassed. And has that habit made life easier? Marin smiles with quiet honesty. Not even once. The woman tilts her head with curiosity. Then why keep doing it? Marin glances back toward the ballroom where laughter and music continue as though nothing unusual has happened. Because someone should speak when everybody else stays quiet. Maybe I am wrong sometimes, like tonight. But I would rather apologize for misunderstanding someone than spend the rest of my life wondering why I said nothing. The older woman studies her face carefully, almost as if searching for something beyond the words themselves. That is a rare answer. Before Marin can respond, another server calls her name from the end of the hallway. Break is over. She nods politely. Thank you again for the handkerchief. I promise I will return it after I have it cleaned. The woman simply smiles. Keep it until we meet again. Those words linger in Marin's mind long after she walks back into the ballroom. The rest of the evening passes without another unexpected scene. She refills coffee cups, clears dinner plates, and quietly avoids looking toward the mysterious man she confronted earlier. Yet every now and then she notices him across the room speaking respectfully with employees, shaking hands with volunteers, and thanking members of the kitchen staff before accepting a dessert plate. None of it matches the arrogant image she had created inside her head only hours earlier. When the gala finally ends close to 11 that night, Marin changes into her faded denim jacket, steps outside, and pulls the cool autumn air into her lungs. New York feels different after midnight. The streets are quieter, the traffic softer, and the glittering towers seem almost peaceful. She begins the 12-minute walk toward the subway station instead of paying for a ride share. Every dollar matters. Her phone vibrates inside her pocket. It is her Aunt Linda. Did everything go all right, sweetheart? Marin forces brightness into her voice. Mostly. Aunt Linda immediately recognizes the hesitation. What happened? Marin cannot help laughing at herself. I accidentally yelled at one of the guests in front of half the ballroom. There is a long pause before her aunt bursts into laughter. Please tell me there is more to that story. There is. I was completely wrong. She explains everything while waiting for the crosswalk signal to change. By the time she reaches the subway entrance, Aunt Linda sighs gently. You know what I hear? That I embarrassed myself? No. I hear that you still have the same heart your mother had. She also believed people deserved kindness before they earned status. Marin looks down at the white handkerchief still wrapped carefully around her wrist. I wish my heart came with better judgment. Judgment can be learned, her aunt replies. Kindness cannot. The words stay with Marin long after the call ends. The next morning arrives much earlier than she would like. At 6:30, she unlocks the front door of Harper's Diner, the little neighborhood restaurant where she works weekday breakfast shifts. The familiar smell of fresh pancakes, sizzling bacon, and brewed coffee replaces the expensive perfume and polished marble from the previous evening. Here nobody wears tuxedos. Construction workers sit beside nurses finishing overnight hospital shifts. Retired couples split slices of pie while college students rush through eggs before class. This world makes sense to her. She ties on her blue apron, greets regular customers by name, and almost convinces herself that the previous night belongs in another lifetime. Then the small bell above the entrance rings. She looks up automatically, expecting another commuter searching for coffee before work. Instead, the same calm blue eyes meet hers from across the diner. The man she publicly accused the night before quietly steps inside wearing dark jeans, a navy sweater, and an ordinary jacket. Without the expensive suit, he looks less like someone from a ballroom and more like any other customer looking for breakfast. He offers a polite smile before choosing a booth near the window. Marin stands completely still, the coffee pot suddenly feeling much heavier in her hand as she realizes the last person she expected to see has somehow found the one place in New York where she thought she could simply be herself. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The morning sunlight spills through the front windows of Harper's Diner, catching tiny dust particles in the air, while the familiar sound of sizzling bacon and clinking coffee mugs fills the room. Marin forces herself to move. Running away would only make yesterday even more embarrassing. She pours fresh coffee into a clean mug, walks to the booth, and sets it gently in front of him. Good morning, she says, keeping her voice professional. Welcome to Harper's. What can I get for you? The man looks up with the same calm expression she remembers from the gala. Black coffee was exactly what I needed. Thank you. Marin nods. Would you like breakfast? Your recommendation. She glances toward the menu. The blueberry pancakes are popular. So is the farmhouse omelet. He smiles faintly. Then I will trust your judgment. She cannot help letting out a quiet laugh. After last night, that seems like a risky decision. His smile grows just enough to soften the seriousness in his face. Everyone deserves a second chance. Those simple words catch her off guard. She expected sarcasm, maybe even quiet satisfaction after seeing her embarrassment. Instead, he sounds sincere. She shifts uneasily beside the table. I owe you an apology. He waits without interrupting. I assumed the worst about you before I knew the whole story. I should have asked instead of accusing. He folds his hands around the warm coffee mug. You believed someone was being treated unfairly. I was still wrong. Yes, he replies honestly. But your reason came from compassion, not cruelty. There is a difference. Marin studies him for a moment. Most people with money defended their pride before anything else. This man seemed strangely uninterested in proving himself right. "May I ask you something?" she says. "Of course. How did you find this place?" He glances around the cozy diner where regular customers laugh over breakfast and the cashier greets nearly everyone by name. "Your supervisor mentioned you worked mornings. I wanted to make sure you knew I was not offended." Marin blinks in surprise. "You came all the way here just for that. I did not like the idea that you might spend days feeling guilty over an honest mistake." Before she can answer, an elderly customer near the counter accidentally drops a small paper bag filled with prescription bottles. Orange containers roll across the floor in every direction. Without hesitation, both Marin and the stranger step forward at exactly the same time. Marin kneels to gather the bottles while he carefully picks up the woman's cane before handing it back with both hands. "Take your time," he tells her gently. "Nothing is broken." The woman smiles gratefully. "Thank you, young man." Within seconds, everything is back inside the bag. The customer pats both of their hands before returning to her booth. Marin notices something she had missed the previous evening. He helps naturally, without looking around to see who is watching. There is no performance in it. He returns to his seat as though nothing unusual happened. She places a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of him a few minutes later. "On the house," she says. He shakes his head. "Absolutely not. Good food deserves to be paid for. Consider it my apology. Then I will accept your apology, but not free breakfast." He quietly leaves enough cash to cover the meal and a generous tip beneath the coffee cup before taking the first bite. "You were right, by the way." Marin looks puzzled. "About what?" "These may be the best blueberry pancakes in Manhattan." She laughs again, this time without any embarrassment. For the first time since meeting him, the conversation feels easy instead of awkward. They spend the next 20 minutes talking about ordinary things instead of wealth or charity galas. He asks how long she has worked at the diner. She tells him about balancing 2 jobs while helping care for her aunt. He admits he rarely has mornings free enough to enjoy breakfast anywhere. She notices he answers every question honestly while somehow revealing almost nothing about himself. When the breakfast rush finally begins, he stands and reaches for his jacket. "Thank you for the coffee," he says, "and for giving me the opportunity to clear up a misunderstanding." Marin walks him toward the front door. "I still do not even know your name." He pauses with one hand on the handle before looking back at her with a thoughtful smile. "Callum, I am Marin." "I know," he replies gently. "I hope we meet again under less dramatic circumstances." As the bell above the entrance rings and the door closes behind him, Marin notices the folded receipt on the table. Tucked beneath it is a handwritten note in careful script. It says only 6 words. "Never stop standing up for people." Over the next several days, life quietly settles into a rhythm Marin almost convinces herself is ordinary again. Yet every morning around 8:15, the little bell above the diner's entrance rings, and Callum walks in wearing another simple sweater instead of an expensive suit. He always orders black coffee. Sometimes he chooses pancakes. Other mornings he asks for oatmeal and fresh fruit. He never rushes through breakfast, never checks his phone every few seconds like most professionals, and somehow remembers the names of nearly every employee after meeting them only once. Marin begins looking toward the entrance without realizing it, catching herself smiling whenever the familiar bell announces another customer. She tells herself it is only because talking with him makes the long breakfast shift pass more quickly. Nothing more. One rainy Thursday morning, she notices him quietly paying for the meal of a young construction worker whose wallet comes up $20 short. He does it so discreetly that the man never even realizes who covered the bill. Another day, he spends nearly 10 minutes helping an elderly veteran figure out how to use a new smartphone instead of leaving for whatever important meeting surely waits somewhere across the city. Every small moment chips away at the first impression Marin formed inside that ballroom. The image of an arrogant stranger slowly disappears, replaced by someone patient, thoughtful, and surprisingly easy to laugh with. "You ask a lot of questions," Marin says one morning while refilling his coffee. "Occupational habit," Callum replies with a smile. "And what occupation would that be?" He stirs his coffee thoughtfully. "Problem solving." That sounds suspiciously vague. Sometimes vague is accurate. She narrows her eyes playfully. "You are hiding something." "Everyone hides something. Not everyone hides it well." He laughs, and the sound is genuine enough that several nearby customers glance toward their booth. Marin realizes she has never heard him laugh like that before. Later that afternoon, after her breakfast shift ends, she walks 3 blocks to the neighborhood pharmacy to pick up medication for Aunt Linda. The prescription costs more than expected. She quietly removes 2 bottles from the counter, planning to return next week when she has enough money. Insurance changed again? The pharmacist asks sympathetically. Marin nods with a tired smile. It will be fine. We can wait a few days. As she leaves the pharmacy carrying only part of the prescription, she never notices the dark SUV parked across the street or the familiar pair of blue eyes watching through the windshield with quiet concern. Callum says nothing to his driver. He simply watches Marin disappear around the corner carrying a worn canvas bag that looks far heavier than it should. That evening, Vivian Whitmore sits comfortably inside the library of the Whitmore family estate, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands as Callum walks in after another long day. She studies her son carefully before speaking. You have been eating breakfast away from the office quite often. Callum smiles faintly. The pancakes are excellent. Vivian raises one eyebrow. I imagine the waitress is equally memorable. Callum chuckles softly, but does not deny it. She is unlike anyone I have met in a very long time. Vivian gently places her teacup onto its saucer. She defended a stranger before considering the consequences. She apologized without making excuses. She treats every customer exactly the same whether they arrive in work boots or tailored suits. Do you know how rare that is? Callum looks curiously at his mother. You have been thinking about her too. Vivian smiles with quiet satisfaction. I have lived long enough to recognize character when I see it. She reaches into a nearby drawer and carefully unfolds the matching handkerchief to the one she had given Marin at the gala. Blue flowers are embroidered along the edges by hand many years earlier. She still has the other one, Callum says. I noticed it folded inside the pocket of her apron yesterday. Vivian's smile grows warmer. That means she values kindness more than luxury. She pauses before adding one thoughtful sentence that lingers in the quiet room long after the words are spoken. Sometimes the person who belongs in this family is the one who has absolutely no interest in becoming part of it. Across the city, completely unaware that anyone is talking about her, Marin carefully washes the delicate white handkerchief by hand in warm water before hanging it to dry beside the kitchen window, promising herself that the next time she sees the elegant woman who lent it to her, she will finally have the chance to return it with the gratitude it deserves. Friday arrives with unusually clear skies, and Harper's Diner buzzes with its familiar breakfast crowd. Marin moves between booths carrying steaming plates while quietly rehearsing the words she plans to say if the elegant woman ever returns for her handkerchief. She has carefully ironed it the night before, folding every corner with the same attention her mother once taught her. Around 8:30 the front door opens, but instead of Callum walking in alone, he is accompanied by the graceful woman Marin immediately recognizes. Vivian smiles the moment their eyes meet. Good morning, she says warmly. I hope I am not interrupting your busiest hour. Marin feels genuine relief spread across her face. Not at all. She quickly reaches into the pocket of her apron and removes the beautifully folded white handkerchief. I have been hoping I would see you again. Thank you for letting me borrow this. Vivian accepts it, gently running her fingers across the embroidered blue flowers before unexpectedly placing it back into Marin's hands. I believe it belongs with you now. Marin blinks in confusion. I cannot accept something so personal. Vivian smiles. Perhaps think of it as a reminder that kindness should never be regretted, even when it leads to uncomfortable moments. Before Marin can answer, another waitress calls for help carrying several breakfast plates. Excuse me for 1 minute. She hurries away, returning only after serving 3 nearby tables. When she reaches their booth again, Callum has quietly stood to help an elderly customer zip up his coat before sitting back down without drawing attention to himself. Vivian notices Marin watching him. He has always believed leadership begins with small things, she says softly. Marin smiles. He hides that side of himself very well. Sometimes he hides too much, Vivian replies with a knowing glance toward her son. The conversation is interrupted by the large television mounted above the counter. The local morning news suddenly cuts to a live broadcast from Midtown Manhattan, where reporters stand outside the gleaming headquarters of Whitmore Holdings. Breaking this morning, the anchor announces. Whitmore Holdings will unveil its largest community investment initiative later today. Billionaire Chief Executive Officer Callum Whitmore is expected to address shareholders and nonprofit leaders during the company's annual foundation presentation. The entire diner grows quieter for a moment. Several customers glance toward the screen where Callum's photograph fills the television beside the enormous Whitmore Holdings logo. Marin slowly turns toward the man sitting only a few feet away. Her coffee pot nearly slips from her fingers. She looks back at the television, then at Callum again. The same calm blue eyes. The same quiet smile. The same voice she has shared breakfast conversations with for nearly a week. Her heart begins pounding so loudly she barely hears the rest of the broadcast. "You," she whispers. "You are Callum Whitmore." He meets her gaze without looking away. "Yes." The single word feels heavier than everything else she has heard all week. Memories rush together inside her mind. The elegant gala. The mysterious stranger. The simple sweaters. The ordinary breakfasts. The vague answers. Problem solving. She suddenly understands why every employee at the charity event reacted the way they did. Why he never seemed impressed by expensive surroundings. Why Vivian carried herself with such quiet confidence. She takes one slow step backward, struggling to process everything at once. "You never told me." Callum speaks gently. "You never asked my last name." Marin cannot argue because he is right. She had accepted him exactly as he presented himself, never imagining the man enjoying blueberry pancakes in a neighborhood diner led one of the largest companies in America. Vivian quietly watches both of them, saying nothing. She has seen enough years to understand that some truths need silence more than explanations. Marin lowers her eyes for a moment before looking back at Callum. "Was this some kind of test?" she asked softly. "Were you waiting to see how I would treat you before revealing who you really were?" Callum immediately shakes his head. "No. The only thing I wanted was the chance to know the woman who spoke honestly before she knew anything about my name, my company, or my bank account." The breakfast rush continues around them as though the world has not shifted beneath Marin's feet, yet nothing inside her feels ordinary anymore. The man she believed was simply a thoughtful customer is suddenly the billionaire whose face now fills every television screen in the diner. And for the first time since they met, she is no longer certain whether the distance between their two worlds can ever truly be crossed. The rest of the morning passes in a blur that Marin can barely remember. She continues pouring coffee, greeting customers, and carrying plates to crowded booths, but every familiar movement now feels strangely distant. Each time she glances toward the window booth, she sees Callum speaking quietly with his mother exactly as he had before the television broadcast, as though discovering he was one of the wealthiest men in the country should not have changed anything. Yet for Marin, everything has changed. When the breakfast rush finally slows, she approaches their table carrying the check with hands that are noticeably less steady than usual. "You should have told me," she says quietly. Callum looks up. "Would you have treated me the same if I had introduced myself as the chief executive officer of Whitmore Holdings on the first morning?" Marin hesitates because the honest answer is painful. "Probably not." "Exactly." His voice remains gentle. "I wanted one place where nobody expected anything from me except ordering breakfast." Vivian watches the exchange in silence, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. Marin lowers her eyes. "Now I feel foolish for every conversation we had." "Why?" Callum asks. "Those conversations were real." She sighs softly. "Because I kept assuming we lived in the same world." Before he can answer, the front door swings open and two sharply dressed women step inside. One immediately recognizes Callum. "There you are," she says with a polished smile that barely hides her irritation. "The board has been trying to reach you all morning." She turns toward Marin, briefly looking her up and down before offering a courteous smile that somehow feels colder than open criticism. "You must be the waitress everyone has been whispering about." Marin forces a polite nod. "Good morning." The woman extends a perfectly manicured hand toward Callum. "Your interview begins in 45 minutes. Reporters are already gathering." Callum remains seated. "I know the schedule, Victoria." Victoria's expression tightens almost invisibly before she notices the folded white handkerchief resting beside Marin's order pad. "Interesting," she says lightly. "Your mother does not usually give away family keepsakes." Vivian calmly meets her gaze. Perhaps I finally met someone worth sharing one with. Victoria lets out a restrained laugh. How charming. She looks back at Marin. Just a little advice. Public attention around successful people can be overwhelming. Many ordinary lives become very complicated after accidental encounters with billionaires. The words sound pleasant enough to anyone listening nearby, yet the meaning behind them lands with unmistakable precision. Marin feels her cheeks warm. Before she can respond, Callum calmly stands. Victoria, that is enough. His tone never rises, but even the busy diner seems to grow quieter. Victoria quickly recovers her professional smile. Of course, I simply wanted to be helpful. She and her assistant leave moments later, disappearing into a waiting black sedan outside. Marin stares through the front window until the vehicle pulls away. She thinks I am after your money. Callum answers immediately. She does not know you. Maybe she knows your world better than I do. He shakes his head. My world is full of people who decide someone's value before learning their name. You did exactly the opposite. Marin looks down at the handkerchief again, suddenly feeling as though it weighs far more than a piece of embroidered linen should. I think it is better if we stop having breakfast together. Vivian quietly studies her expression, while Callum remains completely still. Is that what you truly want? He asks. Marin takes a slow breath. I do not know what I want anymore. Last week I thought you were just a kind man who liked blueberry pancakes. Today I find out you lead an international company. Your life is followed by reporters, and people already assume the worst about me after 5 minutes. She gently places the white handkerchief on the table beside Vivian's teacup. I cannot become another headline. Vivian looks at the folded linen, but does not pick it up. Instead, she says softly, character is rarely revealed when life is easy. It is revealed when walking away seems safer than staying. Marin offers a grateful smile filled with quiet sadness before removing her apron at the end of her shift and stepping outside into the cool afternoon air. Behind the diner's window, Callum watches her disappear into the crowd without trying to stop her, understanding that some distances cannot be closed with wealth, influence, or perfectly chosen words, only with patience and truth. 3 days pass without Callum appearing at Harper's diner. Marin tells herself that is exactly what she wanted. There are no awkward conversations, no curious glances from customers who recognize him from television, and no reminders that the distance between their lives stretches farther than she can imagine. Yet every morning, when the little bell above the entrance rings, part of her still looks toward the door before she catches herself. Aunt Linda notices the change immediately. One evening while they share homemade vegetable soup in their tiny apartment, she quietly asks, "Did you lose someone, or are you trying very hard to convince yourself that you did not?" Marin stares into her bowl before answering. "I met someone who belongs in a different world." Aunt Linda smiles gently. Sometimes worlds are different only because people decide they should stay that way. Marin shakes her head. You did not see the people around him. They already think I have some hidden plan simply because I know his name. Her aunt reaches across the table and gently squeezes her hand. The opinions of strangers have never guided your life before. Do not let them start now. The following Saturday afternoon, Harper's Diner closes early for routine maintenance. Marin decides to spend her unexpected free time volunteering at the neighborhood community pantry, where she has helped several weekends each month for almost 2 years. She organizes canned food, carries boxes, and helps elderly neighbors load groceries into reusable bags. No cameras wait outside. No reporters ask questions. It is simply a place where kindness quietly becomes routine. As she finishes stacking fresh produce onto wooden shelves, a familiar, elegant voice speaks behind her. I thought I might find you somewhere exactly like this. Marin turns and sees Vivian Whitmore standing near the entrance wearing a simple beige coat instead of designer evening wear. She looks completely at home among volunteers arranging food donations. Marin smiles with genuine surprise. Mrs. Whitmore. Vivian gently shakes her head. Please call me Vivian. Marin nods. What brings you here? Vivian slowly walks beside her, watching volunteers greet families with warm smiles. I wanted to see whether the woman I met at the gala was the same woman away from expensive ballrooms and polished speeches. Marin laughs softly. I am afraid this is much less glamorous. Exactly, Vivian replies. That is why I came. They spend nearly an hour filling grocery bags together before sitting on a simple wooden bench outside the pantry. The late afternoon sun casts long golden shadows across the sidewalk, while children ride bicycles in the distance and neighbors greet one another by name. Vivian reaches into her handbag and removes the same white handkerchief Marin had returned days earlier. She carefully places it back into Marin's hands once again. "I told you before," she says warmly. "It belongs with you." Marin gently closes Vivian's fingers around it instead. "It belongs to your family." Vivian smiles with quiet certainty. Perhaps it already does. Marin looks at her in confusion. Vivian takes a slow breath before speaking with complete sincerity. "I have spent decades attending charity galas, board meetings, and elegant dinners. I have met politicians, celebrities, and people whose names appear on buildings across this country. Yet do you know how many of them would have interrupted an important evening to defend a stranger they believed was being treated unfairly?" Marin remains silent. "Very few," Vivian answers herself. "Most people protect their reputation first. You protected someone else." Marin lowers her eyes. "I was wrong." "Yes," Vivian says softly. "But your mistake came from compassion, and compassion can be corrected. Indifference cannot." Tears begin gathering in Marin's eyes before she can stop them. Vivian gently reaches for her hand. "My son has built an extraordinary company. I am proud of everything he has accomplished. But success means very little if the people closest to you cannot recognize goodness when it quietly walks into your life, wearing an apron instead of a designer dress." Marin feels emotion tightening in her throat. "Why are you telling me this?" Vivian smiles with the tenderness of someone speaking from the heart instead of social expectation. "Because if Callum is wise enough not to let fear or pride keep him from following his heart, I would be honored to call you my daughter-in-law one day." Marin sits completely speechless, the white handkerchief resting gently between her hands as the meaning of those words settles into the quiet afternoon, unaware that only a few yards away, Callum has just stepped out of his car and witnessed the final moments of the conversation that will change all three of their lives forever. Callum quietly closes the car door and walks toward the community pantry, stopping only a few feet from the wooden bench where Marin and Vivian are still sitting beneath the warm afternoon sun. Neither of them notices him immediately. Marin continues staring at the white handkerchief resting in her hands, still overwhelmed by what Vivian has just said. "I do not know what to say," she whispers. Vivian smiles with gentle certainty. "Then say nothing until your heart is ready." Callum finally steps forward. "That advice has always worked well for me too." Marin looks up, surprised to see him standing there with the same calm smile that first confused her at the gala. Vivian rises from the bench and lightly touches her son's arm. "I believe the two of you deserve a conversation without your mother listening to every word." She walks toward the pantry entrance, leaving them alone beneath the shade of an old maple tree. For several quiet seconds, neither of them speaks. The neighborhood around them feels peaceful. Children laugh somewhere across the street, bicycles roll past, and a cool breeze gently moves the embroidered corners of the white handkerchief. Callum breaks the silence first. "I did not ask my mother to come here." Marin smiles faintly. "I know." Everything she said came from her own heart. Marin nods slowly. That is what makes it so difficult to believe. He sits beside her on the bench, leaving enough space for her to feel comfortable. "Can I ask you one question?" She turns toward him. "Of course. When you stood in that ballroom and believed I was treating someone unfairly, were you afraid?" Marin laughs softly. "Terrified. Then why did you do it?" She looks toward the community pantry where volunteers continue carrying boxes of food for families. "Because I kept thinking about how that woman might have felt if nobody spoke for her. I could survive being embarrassed. I did not want her to feel alone." Callum smiles with quiet admiration. "That is the answer I hoped you would never change." Marin studies him carefully. "Why did you keep coming back to the diner?" He does not hesitate. "Because for the first time in years someone looked at me without seeing headlines, business magazines, or numbers. You argued with me before you respected me. Then you apologized before you knew my name. Everything after that was honest." She lowers her eyes. "I almost walked away because I thought our lives could never fit together." "Our lives are different," Callum says gently. "But our values are not." He reaches into the inside pocket of his jacket and removes the neatly folded diner receipt Marin had written his first breakfast order on. On the back, the 6 handwritten words are still clearly visible. "Never stop standing up for people." "I have carried this every day," he says. It reminds me what kind of leader I still want to become. Tears quietly fill Marin's eyes. You kept that, just as you kept the handkerchief. She smiles through those tears. Your mother keeps giving it back. Callum laughs warmly. She can be very persuasive. At that moment, Vivian returns carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the pantry volunteers. She hands one to each of them before sitting across from the bench. I have watched this conversation from a respectful distance, she says with a playful smile. I believe both of you finally stopped talking about your differences and started noticing everything you already share. Several months later, the grand ballroom of the Grand Astoria is once again filled with warm lights, quiet music, and elegantly dressed guests attending the Whitmore Community Foundation annual celebration. During the previous 6 months, Marin refused every shortcut that could have come from knowing Callum. Instead, she completed nonprofit leadership training through the Whitmore Foundation while continuing to volunteer every weekend at the neighborhood pantry. She first earned the role of volunteer coordinator, organizing local outreach events and food drives. After proving her leadership through hard work and earning the trust of employees across multiple community programs, she was promoted to program manager, preparing her for the foundation's senior leadership team. This time Marin does not arrive, carrying serving trays. She walks beside Callum, now serving as Director of Neighborhood Partnerships after earning every promotion through months of training, community leadership, and the confidence of the foundation's entire executive team. During the evening, Callum steps onto the stage and thanks the volunteers, employees, and neighborhood organizations that helped launch the project. Then he walks back toward Marin, takes her hand, and smiles with the same quiet confidence she first mistook for arrogance. The greatest decision I ever made was listening to the woman who believed kindness mattered more than status, he says softly. Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me of that truth? Marin nods before she can find the words, and the room fills with warm applause as he places a simple engagement ring on her finger. Vivian watches with joyful eyes from the front row, gently dabbing happy tears with the matching white handkerchief she had kept all these years. Later that evening, as guests begin leaving the ballroom, Marin quietly slips the embroidered handkerchief into her purse beside the folded diner receipt that Callum had returned to her. 2 ordinary objects born from one unforgettable misunderstanding, forever reminding them that the strongest relationships are never built on wealth or perfect first impressions, but on courage, humility, forgiveness, and the simple choice to see the goodness in another person before anything else. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.